April 22nd of 1995 as part of the Philadelphia Experience Conference. All materials and matter contained in this tape are the sole property of the lecturer and the president of the Institute for Perpetual Dynamics, Michael S. Ross. Any duplication in either audio, video, or printed form without the permission of the prior mentioned is expressly forbidden and is prosecutable according to all applicable laws.
I came out of the project, I guess maybe a year and a half ago, and it was kind of by storm. Once I broke, and then that was it, and I came out. And immediately went public because it seems to be the safest way to stay alive after you do something like that. I'm just going to read something quickly, and I'm going to give you a reference, so if you want to look this up yourself. We'll be getting back to this later, and it also refers to something that Preston talked about. In the New York Newsday, in October 27th of 1994, there was an ad. It was on page A70, and I'm just going to read the first paragraph. It says, Washington astronomers using the Hubble Space Telescope have established that the universe may be billions of years younger than its oldest stars, a finding that has cosmologists scratching their heads. Well, it doesn't seem to make sense, does it? I want to talk to you tonight from an experiential point of view as to what it was like for me to be part of the project. These gentlemen worked from the engineering point. Al had a great deal of experience coming through with the sort of Eldridge thing. But I was used in a great number of factions. As far as the project itself is concerned, they will use you in as many ways as is possible. They believe in the absolute ultimate utilization of the biological factors as we were known there. We weren't people anymore. We weren't individuals at that point. We were biological factors or factions. We were units according to what you were used as. I was pretty much waited for. They knew that I was coming. Remember, this is a time-based experimentation, and therefore information about me was brought back to a time prior to my actual birth. So they knew where I was going to be born, who my parents were going to be. My father was in the United States Navy. He was stationed in a place where he would meet my mother. It was arranged that they would be married. They'd be brought back to the United States. And all the factors that seemed to be consistent or contingent amongst the Montauk people existed exactly in my family. Some of those are this. One, that there's usually military factions somewhere in the family, which is not impressive because a great deal of people have military factions somewhere in their family. But one of the other ones is, within 1 or 2 generations, there will be a member in the family who is in some branch of special forces. My brother was in a branch of the special forces. After he got out of the Vietnam War, where he spent 2 tours of duty, he came back stateside and was immediately within 2 weeks given a job at a government physics facility where I was later on utilized. He has no, at least conscious recollection that I know of the fact that I was utilized out there. He worked in a completely different part of it, consciously. Now this is going to lead to a number of different things, and a few different things that I want to touch on. Number one is, from the time point of view, it brings up a lot of questions and a lot of paradoxes. Now, one of the things that I do now is I work as a therapist presently, and I work with a lot of people with dissociative disorder and missing memory, that sort of thing. You know, we hear in Esquire magazine and recently in Nexus magazine about ex-CIA operatives that all of a sudden are starting to come forward and remember that they were utilized as assassins. You've heard Al speak of how he didn't remember things, Preston didn't remember, I didn't remember until a year and a half ago. We basically went and we had 9 to 5 jobs. You know, I reported to a job in the morning. I worked as an engineer in a pharmaceutical company. You know, and even that itself was interesting. I started there as just an assembler type of factory person, and all of a sudden I realized that I had this like great storehouse of technological skills. But I also had an interesting bend to the technological skills. One of those things was this, and I realized that I just did this, and I didn't realize it until they asked me to teach someone how to do it, like train this guy on how to fix this. It didn't quite bridge over. Let's say there was a problem with a specific computer, a robotic system, and I had to fix it. It was a hardware problem. The way that I would figure it out is not the basic test procedure. I would basically, since I worked alone most of the time, just sort of like drone into the machine and find out where it is. And then I would go, oh, it's the motherboard, there's this pin that crossed over. Apparently someone must have tried to swap it out and they didn't put it in properly. And that's the way I troubleshot machinery. They would get brand new machinery in that I had never seen before, and they go, it's not running right, what do you think it is? And I just sort of like put my hands on it, drone in, and I'd go, deep inside, there's a major shaft, and there's a micro switch on there, and it's not tripping properly. So that just didn't seem out of hand to me, I just thought that was my skill, and that's the way I do it. Until, as I said, I had to try and transfer that over. Now, at the time I was trained to be a therapist, and I was going through my own experiences with therapy and that sort of thing. Because if you're going to be a good therapist, you should try it yourself. You don't want to bring people into uncharted territory. And I wound up, as I said, also working with a lot of people with dissociative disorder, multiple personality disorder. Now, one of the interesting things is that the way that these people find out that they have dissociative disorder or fragmented personality is that they have lost time or large branches or sections of time that seem to just be blank for them. So after a while, they can pretty much guess like there's something going on here. Now, we didn't. Like I said, I would work 9-to-5 job. I would go out and I'd work my regular job, and I'd come in at, let's say, 9 o'clock, and at 5 o'clock, I'd go home. And I would work this whole day, and everyone would see me at work, and everyone would remember me and go through, the big, hi, Mike, how are you? I had lunch with these guys, went out, and we did this and this. We stopped by this hot dog stand and all of this stuff. At the same time, from 9 to 5, I would go in and report for duty to Fort Hero for 6 months, which was the average tour of duty. Okay, so you go in at 9 o'clock in the morning, you go to Fort Hero for 6 months, and you come back at 9 o'clock in the morning and do an 8-hour shift. So talk about really utilizing it. I was very tired at the end of the day. Now this seems bizarre, and it causes a lot of parallax things, a lot of anomaly problems. And it also is a great cover. What better cover could you possibly have? Now, a lot of the things that went on that I've accepted now and have proven through, I just disavowed then because I said, that couldn't possibly be, because I know I work 9 to 5, and this is a reality structure that I can much more readily accept than the fact that I was out and part of this great government project and did all of these like wild things, okay? Now, we're going to talk about some of the other things that I was used in. One of the things that we found out was that I was a rogue empath, okay? That I had specific empathic abilities. But it wasn't just the human factors interfacing empathic abilities, it was also interfacing with machinery, as I said. And that's where I had come into the factoring section. Now, you had heard Preston speak about the chairs inside of the ship that he had experimented with. Well, they had duplicated these chairs out at Fort Hero, and they were using them for time factoring, as Preston also said. And I was brought in at age 13 for my first shot at being used as one of the Montauk boys. Now, the Montauk boys was a pretty horrendous, it was a pretty horrendous part of the project, and it encompassed a great deal of things. All right. Basically, it was they would go out, they'd go through all the schools, they had the pick of the litter, who they wanted, bring these kids in. Some of them would be, they'd be from broken homes, so they would be running the streets, that sort of thing. They'd haul them in, bring them in, and they would preen them for this project. But not just to be used in time-based experimentations, for all sorts of things. And for basic experimentations. They were livestock to be used and tossed aside if necessary, and hopefully used and, as they would see it, enhanced so that other things could be done with them. Now, to give you an idea of some of the things that they did, they were working with, and this gets back to fragmented consciousness again. They were working with the early stages of how do you have someone forget all of this stuff going on so that they can function, go and have a regular 9 to 5 job, that they can go home, have a regular family life, and at the same time be this person that's being used in this incredible affair. Well, what they would do is they would preen these guys, they'd bring them in, and they would basically torture them almost to the brink of death. At that point, they would experience an out-of-body experience, and they would pretty much harness and contain that bit of consciousness that came out. All right? Now, to put it in simple terms, if you consider this bit of consciousness, maybe they beat the magnetic tape out of your head, okay? That little bit of strip of magnetic tape, for an easy way of putting it, and they take it out of your head, and it has a whole bunch of information on it, okay? And this is you. This is your identity, okay? So what they would do is they would get this, they would read it out, they would get the signature, the boson signature of the person involved, and then they would alter it. They would take a section, and they would pretty much erase it and put in what they wanted. This was the birth of designer consciousness. This could be enacted to do all sorts of things. One of the uses that the CIA wound up finding for this is if they had someone that they wanted to carry information for them, they would pick them up, they would do this to them, put that information in that piece of their consciousness, which can only be specifically accessed through certain encoded processes, and then they send them out there. So even if they get picked up and they get tortured and they get hypnotized and they give them psychotropic drugs, this is something that they can't access, and the enemy is never going to be able to get a hold of. When they get to the next operative where they are supposed to, they enact the part of the sequence that unlocks this, the ketones or whatever it was that they were going to use to unlock this, and the information gets dumped. That was one way. The other way, or the other function of this, was if you could segment this part of the human consciousness, or that human consciousness, you could literally write a script for a functional being, okay? Now, hold on to this idea for a second, and we're going to go into the next part, the development of the Montauk Delta Force. It became very apparent early on, since this was a time-based project, and they weren't just doing time travel at that point. They were doing temporal travel. They were jumping large distances in space as well. They had realized that there are going to be situations, because they were going back and cleaning up their messes, where we are going to need a military militia, very highly experienced and trained militia. Once again, they had the cream of the crop. They had gentlemen that were extremely well-trained psyops people. They could do psionic warfare, psychic warfare, if you will. We hear a lot about there's even a professional company that you can hire for your company to do psychic espionage into other companies. The government uses them all the time, and now they're to the open market, so large businesses can hire these people to tap in. These guys were used to shield, even kill these people using psychic means. If you could use psychic domination, you could literally get someone, you could walk up and just say, put the gun in your mouth and pull the trigger, and these people would do it. So what they would do is they would take this section and they would train it and use it as this sort of alternate, the Montauk alternate for these guys, all right, their Delta alternate. Now this could be activated from a number of ways. It could be activated from phone toning. It could also be activated from the Cardion signature that Preston was just talking about. They would basically broadcast out, just like a beeper for like a volunteer fire department. They would send out a wave pattern that would trigger this part, and these guys would just time to report for duty. And they would snap together and they would go to whatever assessed spot that they had to go to. This was part of the project that I was utilized in, but not at first. Early on, as I said, at age 13, they hauled me in, and I was going to be used as part of the factoring part of the vortices, okay? And as a thought transform. And what they do is they put me in one of these chairs, and they said, well, this is what we want you to do. And they basically explained for me how it was going to work. They said there are going to be 3 time locks, okay? There's going to be an infinite future, and they're just going to sort of project and focus their consciousness on an infinite future band. There's another person who's going to try and focus their consciousness as far back as they can, eliminating everything else. We're not talking the conscious mind, but the subconscious mind, because the conscious mind is too easily jarred and too easily drifted. The third will hold a present lock, and then the fourth person will produce a lock for wherever it is that we want to go or open up to. Now, I was told that what I was supposed to do is I was supposed to hold this future lock for my experimentation, for my first run out. And they drugged us up and they gave us each of our chairs. Now the chair room was pretty small. It was like pretty claustrophobic, and it was basically just a chair. And it had some electrodes and wires that hung off the side and went into the bottom. It was very bright inside. They had a great stereo system. They played great music. For my first time out, they played In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly. And yeah, it's my favorite too. But they played In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida for Iron Butterfly, and it was really warm in there. It was like, I'd say maybe 102 degrees. That's what they kept it at. You were naked and extremely drugged at that time. Well, what happened was they told me, well, we want you to take this lock and go forward as far as you can. Well, that's what I did. But not taking into account the fact that I basically interfaced with machinery anyway, I sort of just jumped. And instead of just taking my consciousness and leaving, I left altogether, which caused a problem because I was supposed to be part of this machinery in this factory. I got thrown into the time C, and I'll explain what that is in a second. In the time C, it was a pretty traumatic thing to be there, and when I explain what it is, you'll see why. And at first I was very frightened, and I said, well, I got here, I could pretty much just hold the consciousness and follow it back. And I did, and I came back at that point, and I got hauled out, and everyone was very upset, basically because all of a sudden all my readouts dropped out. And I got taken out for debriefing. I was still pretty drugged, and they threw me on a gurney. I got pulled in by the Rigelians, which are one of the great factors out there. In a second. In the time C, it was a pretty traumatic thing to be there. And when I explain what it is, you'll see why. And at first I was very frightened, and I said, well, I got here, I could pretty much just hold the consciousness and follow it back. And I did, and I came back at that point, and I got hauled out, and everyone was very upset, basically because all of a sudden all my readouts dropped out, and I got taken out for debriefing. I was still pretty drugged, and they threw me on a gurney. I got pulled in by the Rigelians, which are one of the gray factors out there, gray alien factors out there. I was debriefed by them first. They said, we need to talk to him. Now, let me explain to you a little bit about time as a consciousness goes, okay? Because you're going to have to see this a little bit. Time does not exist really on a linear basis. At least this is not the way they explain it to me. If you consider time, or at least the time that we function in, as being a spherical bubble, okay? And each instant of consciousness as being a little dot covering this entire bubble on all sides, outside and in, okay? Now we perceive consciously time as a linear function. It's, sort of, we came here, it was like 7:30, and it's later on in the evening now. But actually what's been happening is, as a group consciousness, we've been jumping from dot to dot in whatever our group consciousness has agreed to, okay? Now this is part of the function of the Akashic record. Okay, each of us are co-creators in reality. And this is part of the purpose of the project itself. Now, as I said, it looks like a line, but it's not necessarily a line. Now let's jump into seeing some of how this may play into our lives as consciousness. Let's say we'll take a theoretical mission, okay? Let's say we find out that President Kennedy, all right, and by the way, this is theoretical because people come back to me and tell me all the time, what about when you guys went and killed President Kennedy? Now this is theoretical. Let's say President Kennedy, who's still alive, is causing all sorts of problems for the Montauk Project, okay? So what we have to do is we go back, and let's say this is the timeline that exists. We go back and we say, we got to kill him, we got to get rid of him. And we do all the factor research, which means basically they go back and they go, if he dies then this one isn't born, and this one isn't born, and this one never gets married, and this one will marry this one, and blah, blah, blah. And they go through all the genealogy, okay? And they figure out, is someone important to the project going to go bink and disappear? Well, they figure it's safe enough to do, okay? So they go back, and they activate Lee Harvey Oswald, who's really a Montauk boy, and who has this consciousness blacked out, okay? So Lee Harvey Oswald goes and he shoots Kennedy, okay? Or he tries to, but he shoots the senator by accident. Now what happens here? The senator dies, all right? So what happened in this reality where the senator was alive and Kennedy was alive? Does that reality stop? No, this is what happens. A parallel reality, or a skew reality, forms over here, okay? Now remember, this is all a group consciousness. This is a group train of existence. So what happens is the group train of consciousness is riding along here, and instead of riding straight, we all derail because of this project, and we take on this new skew reality. All right? Now this is what's actually going on, and this stays right where it is. That reality still exists. That reality doesn't stop. It still exists. It's in another parallax plane, but it's still there. But our consciousness is riding this one. Okay? Now you go. Lee Harvey, what a jerk, he missed. All right, look, grab a Delta Force commander, send him back. We're going to open up a vortices to the grassy knoll, step out and shoot Kennedy in the head, will ya? So they open up a vortices, he steps out, pow, shoots Kennedy in the head, and now Kennedy and the senator are dead. What happened to these two realities? These both are still in existence. But as a conscious group, we derail and go even farther off. And we ride along here. So even though this is the way the actual structure of consciousness is, to our perception and our perceptual dynamics, things look more like this. This looks like a straight line to us, although it's not really a straight line whatsoever. Right, see how confusing things get? So there's a lot of problems to time travel. That's why mind control is so important to them, and we get to the next part. One of the other functions that I was utilizing was first Project Deep Sleep and Project Dream Sleep, which we did, for me, originally in a New York university. And then later on, it moved to a private laboratory, a government laboratory on Long Island and then out to Fort Hero. And basically they said, as Preston talked about, if we can produce an RF frequency or a radio frequency that can make people aggravated or whatever, and they went through all the basic emotions, if we can make one to get people aggravated, we can make one to make them happy, we can make one to make them sad. What if we can do something even more intricate and produce an entire thought form and project that and get them to accept that? So what they do is they came up with this whole system of mass mind control. But because of free will and the human condition, they come to find that only about 33 1/3% of the people as a whole in consciousness buys into this. There's about 1/3 of the people that go the exact opposite way. You say, be happy, they go, no, and vice versa. And there's about 1/3 of the people that sit on the fence and are just not sure and aren't going to make a move either way, okay? So then they had to go into some of the other more subtle things. Now, how many people here have heard of the 100th monkey theory? A lot of you? All right, for those of you who haven't, because there were also a lot that haven't, I'll give you a brief synopsis of that. Basically, there was this anthropological research study, and it was done in South America. And this, basically the way it worked was they had a bunch of researchers all around South America, and they were watching rhesus monkeys, okay? And then one of the researchers went down and he said, hey, check it out. Mona went down and washed her banana in the river today and started doing that every day after that. So he wrote it in his log, and every 6 months he would meet with the other researchers, and no one else said, that specific thing. Well, as the days went by, more and more of the monkeys in this particular tribe started doing it. They saw Mona, so monkey 21 started doing it, and monkey 18. Eventually, on a specific date, monkey 100 of that tribe cleaned a banana in a river. And what happened was enough of that group consciousness had started doing that on that specific day, all the other researchers in different remote parts of South America reported that all the monkeys started washing the bananas, even in their tribes that had no contact with these. So basically it comes down to a numbers game now. Now we're talking about a consciousness war. So a lot of this boils down to just that, the reality wars. Fight to control reality. And that's what it's all based about. All this time garbage, this overlaying stuff is all, who can be like unto God? That's the whole idea. I want to be the creator of what goes on. I mean, what is the, you figure, if you just follow the mind of a megalomaniac, the first thing you got to do is you got to be boss of everybody. And then once you're boss of everybody, let's say you're in the Illuminati and you're way up there at this point, and you go, you know what, we basically run all the money, we run all the countries, we decide where the wars are going to be. How can you reach for any more power than that? At that point, you have to start usurping actual creation and actual structure of reality itself. So you have these time overlays you play around with, that sort of thing, vying for fixing things if it's not the way you like it. If you can't do it that way, an easier way to do it is to work consciousness. Another reason why they need to work consciousness, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Akashic Record now. Now, the Akashic Record is a combined force of all of our consciousnesses, and we all have input into it. And each of our input is equally as valuable as every other input. No one has a bigger input into the Akashic Record than anybody else does. I have no greater than this gentleman or this lady over here. We all have, or anyone at the Montauk Project either, for that matter. All right? So basically, if you go into the deli, and there are 3 types of sandwiches that you can pick, let's say cucumber, chicken, and tuna salad, and you pick tuna salad as opposed to the other 2, you have already made a decision that's affecting the entire universe. It's a pretty big responsibility, isn't it? Well, this becomes very difficult to factor, and if you're going to control reality, this becomes a real pain in the neck. So it's much easier if you could just pump out, everybody wants chicken salad today, and everyone go like, wow, I must have chicken salad today, So this is a great deal of why all this mind control is going on. The easiest way to gain full power is to control reality and creation itself. One of the other things that they worked in out there, and it brought about the initial actual discovery of the time travel part of it, was they were trying to create matter from the ethers. And what they would do is they would take an object, let's say this chair over here, and each thing has a boson signature, a specific signature, as Preston had said before. And one of the unique things that Mr. Duncan Cameron can do is Duncan can take an object like this chair, and he can empathically link with it and hold that consciousness or that thought form that this chair holds, which makes it specifically that chair. Now, if you have the ability to take this thought form and transfer it into the machinery and create that same specific vibration and add materials, raw, crude, creative materials in which to bring it about, you can produce that chair. Well, they found that in the early stages they would try to do this. They would try to manifest something and nothing would come about. Well, so they would stop and they'd go away and they'd go back to the drawing board and they'd come back a number of hours later and find that it was there. Physically, that it was there. And then they started to realize that there was an overlap here somewhere. Not only that, but they also had predated information. Remember, the Philadelphia experiment had already existed.
This concludes the end of side 1. At this time, please fast forward to the end of this side and turn the tape over now.